Hey, so I'm gonna do a little bit more live streaming today. Another beautiful day up here in Bay Area. Wanted to talk a little bit about communication and what communication has come to mean to me over the past couple of years, as we become more familiar with the information age. So communication has changed a lot from what I can tell of even what it was just in, up until like the 90s and early 2000s. For the first time ever, people in any position in life, in any knowledge level, at any experience, anywhere in the world, can communicate with one another easily. There was a time when we could really only truly communicate, have real conversations. Really, we were limited to letters, remote contact through representatives with experts in knowledge bases and fields of study, unless we, ourselves were somehow connected to those fields of study, those fields of practice. So people tended to need to have these experts that were middlemen between them and other experts. And I think it's quite fascinating now that we can have an abundance of access to information, not just direct communication, but also thoughts and studies and research that we've never been able to have before. And this has resulted in two quite amazing phenomenons. Number one, more people know more things than ever before in human history. We also tend to understand a lot less than we think we do, because knowing is not understanding. Knowing is just knowing the facts, or, in most cases, just data, and often not having the context of practical application and that, the wisdom of doing it. And we tend to resist actual communication with people who practice these things. A lot of that has to do with mostly the experts have a hard time communicating with people who are non-experts. I've seen a lot recently on comedians classic career comedians like Alan Alda teaching improv to scientific experts, quantum physicists and medical experts, and it's quite fascinating to see something like medical improv be taught to scientific minds for the sake of more lay communication. This I think will help us get off of this expert addiction we've come to be accustomed to, because with this over information we have more of a demand than ever for people who can help us get context on things. But what I find really interesting is the personal application of this. And when we get beyond that realm of experts, we have practical experts, people who are so far outside of our wheelhouse of experience. It's creating massive opportunity for younger and older people than ever to meet with, people who think different through communication over the internet, communication through apps and networking, people outside of their experiences that they would never be able to meet from, their physical social circles, like at work or, in their community. And we run into a lot of problems. At least I know I run into a lot of problems knowing how to communicate with people who think with different syntaxes, I guess is a word, just different contextual languages where words can mean different things. For example, one of the things I say a lot recently getting into tech is I envision a world where everything is free and open source. But what does that mean? Like, what does that really mean? I mean, some people, they may not know what open source means, so all they hear is free and they hear socialism. On the other hand, a developer, which I am not, I'm desperately trying to learn to understand that syntax, that contextual language more and more. I'm realizing to them, they just hear, everything open source, everything free. And that's, that makes them nervous. And I've been trying to understand this more and more. And I realize, it's not absolutely free. It's not absolutely open source. One of the things that I really admire about, let's say, the World Wide Web, that is a protocol that is open source. That means it's free to share. Anyone can use it. Anyone can copy that source code of the protocol and create any application they want, whether or not it's, open or closed, for-profit, non-profit. And I think that's what I mean. And whether or not you're talking about startups, whether or not you're talking about, business outside of tech, whether or not you're talking about, religion, money, whatever it is, words mean different things to different people. Even when we know the proper definition of things, even when we look up the proper definition of things, things can be contextually drastically different. Let's take certain acronyms, for example. I mean, there are so many acronyms that I've looked up that mean something completely different than the context I heard it in. Like, let's take NLP, for example. NLP means two completely different things in computer science and in, I guess the outskirts of psychology. So you have natural language processing and neuro-linguistic programming. But if you say NLP to two different people, like, one person may not know what NLP means at all. Another person may hear natural language processing. Another person may hear neuro-linguistic programming. And people may have biases to those one way or another. It's like people may be willing to talk about natural language processing, but once you bring up neuro-linguistic programming, they may have a huge bias against that. And it's really maddening to navigate these sort of social biases, whether or not a word means something good or bad. Like, this is especially common in slang. But now it's so far beyond these slang contexts and so far beyond acronyms. Oftentimes we're talking about the same thing but using different contextual terminology to the point where we may know the definition of something, and two people can be arguing over semantics to the point where they're using the same definition, but it means something different to them personally. Like, that personal bias, they may know the exact same definition, but for one person it may mean something good, and another person it may mean something bad, and they're arguing over a type of semantics that's what's the term, sentiment. Like, they're just arguing over sentiment, where definition is almost useless when it comes to the most advanced stuff, the most important stuff for us to talk about as a human society. Definitions in that logic is only taking us so far, and sentiments are keeping us from understanding one another. And I find that quite interesting because my sentiment of certain things, like let's take it back to the free and open source. My sentiment is, coming from a background where I didn't believe in free and open source anything when it came to technology. And now I believe in free and open source, but not absolutely. Like, I definitely believe that people should be able to have closed applications. I believe almost any protocol, any algorithm will not only benefit from being free and open source, but it's an inevitable outcome of, protocols and algorithms in the world we live in. So it's not even an absolute where I think that it's not a bad idea for people to even charge for protocols and algorithms, but understanding that creating a business model on that with, is like a logical fallacy. Trying to predict that your protocol or your algorithm is going to be, lucrative just because it is in the beginning when it's new is kind of ludicrous with the demand for things like protocols and algorithms. But having the foresight to charge for it up front to fund further development of other ideas, but also locking in like an expiration of it will eventually become open source past a certain date, or past a certain market penetration, or if it doesn't reach a certain market penetration by a certain time. Like, these are certain things even though I have a strong sentiment against things like intellectual property, I believe that people should have the ability to define their boundaries of intellectual property however they believe. That's why I believe so much in the Creative Commons licensing for creative stuff, and why I believe so much in open source licensing. And if we could create our own boundaries, like our own personal constitution of how we define things both logically and through sentiment, I think we'd solve a lot of our problems. I know that it's really tough to manage this mentally. Like, this is what I've been trying to do the past year, and sometimes it's just maddening. Like, I realize I get into arguments about things that I'm actually agreeing with someone on. Like, there's, a developer that I met last fall who we butted heads with each other for about like 2 months, maybe longer. And it took me a while to realize that he was just trying to understand what I was talking about. So he was poking holes in it, seeing where we aligned, where we didn't align. And the more he dug, the more he saw we were aligned. And I'm like, the whole time I thought he just didn't get it because we were speaking two different languages. Even though we were both speaking English, like, he was looking at it from a logical production side, whereas I was looking at it from, a creative rights side. And I think we do this on a lot of things that are becoming more commonly spoken of, that have never been commonly spoken of in humanity up until the most recent, social networking era of the internet. And we're talking about things from advanced sciences to advanced medical practices to ethics to philosophy to religion, politics, sex, and money, all out in the open. Like, the general, like, strangers discussing with strangers. Like, this is something that I think if my grandfathers were still alive, it would boggle their minds that not only have we broken the taboo of not talking about this stuff at the dinner table, but like we're talking about this everywhere, all the, like, on first dates, at work. And it's like, holy cow, like, we either have two options: go back to self-censorship and stop talking about these things that are obviously really important to us, advanced subjective topics, or we figure out better protocols for human communication that can handle subjective truths. Because I think if we did that, we'd find out that we all agree on a lot more than we realize. And I don't really know where I was going with this, but this is something that's really important to me. And the more I try and communicate with people who think different, the more I realize that it's never them. It's always my perspective. It's always because I was closed-minded in some way. Not completely closed-minded, but more closed-minded than I wanted to believe. And, you know, it's lonely. It's lonely to just believe that other people are dumb or stupid or ignorant, or, you know, they don't get it, or they're bad, or they're evil, or, you know, one of these days they're just going to come to their senses. Like, that's an ego and pride that I didn't know that I even had. Like, I was just unaware. I was completely unaware of it, and it limited my potential. It limited, you know, my capacity to feel, to hear, to connect with people that I never believed I could ever connect with people who are so far different than me that I was able to help them and others. I was able to understand things that I thought I'd never be able to understand, and have empathy for people that have both benefited me and benefited them. And that's something that I feel like at first I wanted to blame technology and communication platforms, but now I realize they don't need to change as much as we do. I think social media needs less of an upgrade than our own biological hardware in our heads. I think since we've been given the tools to connect, it's time we start building the tools to self-correct. This is definitely something that I think is really close to my heart. I think there's a lot more people that can resonate with this than I originally thought, because it used to be lonely to think of this and be afraid of what other people would think. So if you know anybody who could benefit from, you know, hearing this message, or, you know, anybody who, you know, may benefit from helping to build something like I'm talking about. Like I said, I'm not a developer. I don't know how to build these things. I want to learn, so I'm willing to work with anyone who's willing to either teach or do, and I'll share whatever, you know, knowledge I can muster to, you know, help or benefit them in any way with my experience in business and marketing and communication and listening and self-help, you know, motivation, inspiration, you know, whatever skills I could share to help somebody reach their potential that you may know of. Please share this, you know, open and freely with whoever, you know, no permission needed. You have any right, even if you don't know who I am, to comment on this and let me know what you think, or let me know what you think is stupid. Let me know what you think, you know, may need to be improved or tweaked a little bit. Just feedback, good or positive. Let me know. Reach out to me. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedback, your suggestions, your referrals, whatever it may be. Post this, share it to a group, to a different, you know, forum, to, you know, in a message, whatever. Connect with anyone who needs to know that they're not alone, who needs to know that there's hope, needs to know that there's help. All right.